Hey guys, welcome to the last of my year-long TBRs. So I have a bunch of books that I want to read in 2025. I have my Year of Mod read-along. I'm not including any of L.M. Montgomery's books on here because I will be rereading some of those in addition to all of these rereads. I'm going to be picking books for my Read Your Bookshelf challenge, and then I've shared my top 12 fiction TBR that I want to read. I've shared a classics TBR with 12 books that I want to read. Now I have 12 books I would like to reread. I think 2025 is going to be the year of the rereads for me, which is saying a lot because I'm not generally a rereader, but I have read so many good books in the last few years and I want to spend more time with them. So in some ways, this will be a little bit of like the best of the best books, the ones I want to reread. At the same time, books that I have read fairly recently, I'm not ready to reread. So I have a lot of favorites from the last I would say 2 years that are not making it on here. For the well, there's some exceptions, but for the most part, I have read all of these books more than 2 years ago. With a few exceptions, like I said. I have broken it down into categories. We've got historical fiction, non-fiction, classics, and fantasy / science fiction-ish. Fantasy, we'll say. We're not going to go in that order, but that is the 4 categories. The fantasy section is the least represented because I have been reading that genre so much lately, which is great, but that means all my favorites are like relatively new reads for me, so we won't spend a lot of time there. Why don't we start with it? Okay, one of my goals for this coming year is to do some rereading and annotating. Almost every one of these books do I plan to annotate as I reread. There is possibly just one exception actually, but the first one is The Oath by Frank Peretti. I have read this book since I have been on BookTube. I have reread it. I remember being about 16 years old, reading this book for the first time, burning an apple cinnamon candle, and still to this day when I smell that particular smell, I am taken back to living in this, well, my room was in the basement and my walls were forest green, and I just remember lying on my bed and devouring this book. So this is a bit of a supernatural story by Frank Peretti. We are in this town that has a lot of spiritual darkness, I'll say. There's a lot of stuff going on in this town, and people are starting to get, I don't know, they're like black oozing sores near their heart, and yeah, it's a very weird one to explain. I remember rereading it and thinking it really held up. Obviously, this one was written, I think, probably like 94-ish. There's not quite the technology, 1995, that was a pretty good guess. Not quite the technology that we have right now, but other than like the absence of that, I feel like this book has held up very well. So really looking forward to this. This is going to be an October read for me. I just know it, which reminds me of another book I want to, oh man, well, I can't make it 13 books. Well, anyway, definitely reading this in October. The other fantasy, this one I think will be 2 years right away, Tress of the Emerald Sea. I was debating which of Sanderson's books I wanted to reread because it could have been so many, and I still have Wind and Truth to read, so I know that I don't want to start reading the Stormlight Archive again. But this one, we got the ebooks for his Secret Projects books because shipping to Canada just wasn't affordable. But since then, I have got this book sent to me by Charlene, and I want to read it with the pictures. I think that's all there is. There is some color illustrations in the initial like Kickstarter backed ones. I got to see those, but I want to go through and do some annotating in here. So it was inspired by The Princess Bride, but the idea was like, what if Buttercup went after the guy? So here we've got Tress, whose love interest goes on some kind of mission and doesn't come back, and she doesn't sit around. She wants to go find him. And the world that Sanderson has created is very unique. And there are some Cosmere characters that come into play here. It was such a good time. This was my favorite of the secret projects, I think. Although Frugal Wizard, that one was pretty close too. Unfortunately, I don't own that one. My daughter does, so I can't annotate it. So we're going with this one. Okay, let's get into the historical. This is the one I won't be annotating. It's The Wednesday Wars by Gary D. Schmidt. Even though this is technically my book, it lives in my daughter's room because she loves it so much. So it's kind of her copy, even though I bought it. So I won't annotate it. I'm debating. I have always listened to this book and the companion novel, Okay for Now. The audiobooks are so good, but I'd kind of like to sit and read this. So I haven't decided which way I'm going to do it, but definitely going to be rereading it in some form. So this one, our main character's name is Halling Hood. Such a fun name to say out loud. He's in 7th grade and he's pretty sure his teacher hates him. And oh man, we're set during the Vietnam War. It's 1967. His sister is like turning into a hippie. There's troubles with school. He is getting involved in a Shakespeare play. There's all these like different elements going on. And yeah, this is one of my favorite middle grade books, or I think of them as a duology. Even though he went on to write another book, wouldn't recommend the third one, but the first two are so good. Keeping up with the historical, I want to reread The Curse of Misty Wayfair. This was this the first or second Jamie Jo Wright book that I read, and just fell in love with her writing and the Gothic style, and I just want to go through and like underline all the Gothic phrasing and references and different things that I love so much. I always say that one of the things with this book that I love so much is probably, it makes me sound really creepy, the sun's coming out. So we've got two timelines, and in the past timeline the main character is a post-mortem photographer, which is just a fascinating job to me. I do have multiple times spent time on Google searching for pictures of post-mortem photography in Google Images. And I'm not talking about the kind where like the dead person's in the coffin, but like the kind where people would then take like a family photo or a photo of all their kids and they'd be all lined up and like one of them is dead. Like, oh, I do understand that it was expensive and you didn't just take pictures willy-nilly like we do now, but I'm speechless. Yeah, so that's what's happening in the past timeline. And then in the present timeline, there is like a ghostly woman haunting the asylum, and I just remember really enjoying it. So it's been probably 4 years since I read it. Sounds about right, so need to reread it. The last one in the historical genre is the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. One of the longest titles. This is told in letters. World War II, this one guy, he buys a book secondhand and someone's name and possibly address is in there, and we are during World War II. Guernsey is occupied, and this was a guy, right? I don't even remember who. Yeah, I think so. He wants more books, so he writes the person who's in London and was like, can you send another book or recommend another book? And it begins this correspondence, and it's very well done. I feel like the movie is really well done too. I read this lying on the beaches in Mexico years ago, and definitely won't be doing that on my reread, but I'm wondering how much, because to me when I'm reading a book I can often remember, you know, like where I was or the scent of the candle that I was burning. So I'm curious when I reread it, like am I going to be feeling like I'm on a beach in Mexico? Maybe I should read it in like February. Okay, let's do the classics next. So my last book I put on this list, I'm debating whether or not I change it. So when I was talking about reading a book in October, I thought, oh yeah, I've been meaning to reread Frankenstein. So I'm kind of tempted to put Frankenstein on here, but the book that I have right now is North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. And the only reason I'm thinking of switching this out is because, first of all, this is quite big. Frankenstein is quite short. I already have a ton of classics that I want to be reading in 2025. I want to be reading more Elizabeth Gaskell. So I'm not sure if I will read this one or Frankenstein. I'm gonna maybe give myself a little bit of wiggle room there. But this one we follow, what's her name, Margaret. She and her family, her parents, move from the beautiful countryside somewhere in England to an industrial town or city which is kind of dirty and gross. And she really starts to kind of get into social justice and have a passion for the people that are working in these poor working conditions. When I read this book a couple years ago, it was such an easy read, and I was reading it out of the like small classic book, whatever it is, I'm not sure. And then I came across the Penguin English Library, one of these editions at the thrift store, and I think this would be easier to read it from. And I'm excited to annotate it, so we'll see if I get to this one. A classic that, I don't know if it's technically a classic, let's see, when was it published? To me, a classic is a book that's 100 years old. Technically, this one is not. It was first published in 1939, but I'm gonna say, and then there were none. Previously published as 10 Little Indians. So many of her books have multiple titles, and I can see why they would have maybe changed that one, but some of her other ones I'm like, why did you change the title? So this is an Agatha Christie where people get picked off one by one and try to figure out who the murderer is. I'm hoping to do a video while I read this looking for the clues. It is a reread. I have read it before, but I don't really remember anything. So it's not necessarily a whodunit where I try to solve it, because maybe that will come back to me as soon as I start reading it. But I definitely want to read it and look for the clues and film that. I think that would be fun. And my last classic is Little Women. I could just really go for a reread of this. I might even start it right at Christmas time here, because the opening scene opens with "Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents." And so it seems like the best time to be reading Little Women. We've got the 4 March sisters and their mother. It's just a sweet story. It's a little bit heartbreaking. Jo, well, I am not a writer. I am definitely grew up being a Jo, just more replace all her writing with reading, and it's very similar to me. I always love these Puffin in Bloom editions. I wish they would have made more books in these covers. I love these little girls. This one is quite a chunker, but it's got a decently sized font, so it's not like super tiny. I have read Little Women multiple times, but I've never annotated it, so I think that would be really fun to do. Okay, last 4 books are nonfiction, and they're quite different nonfiction. The first one is gonna be a super easy book to check off of this, but it's Book Love by Debbie Tung. So this is just different little comics about being a person that loves books. I loved when I read this. It was just, it felt like someone was spying on me and writing down like the interactions I have with people in books, or ignoring people while I'm reading books. Really enjoyed it. I've gone on to read Debbie Tung's other books. I've enjoyed them, but to me this one is my favorite. So if I don't put it on this list, I feel like I won't prioritize it and it won't get read. So therefore it's on this list. And then we have one that I read, I want to say 10 years ago. Is that possible? Oh, I'm seeing that it has deckled edges, so that's annoying. 2009, yeah, I definitely could have read it 10 years ago. It's The Happiness Project by Gretchen Rubin. I definitely remember getting it out from the library and reading it. So this is why I spent a year trying to sing in the morning, clean my closets, fight right, read Aristotle, and generally have more fun. So every month of the year. She took one thing, one element that apparently makes your life better or makes people happier, and tried to focus on that. And I kind of want to do this along with her. I don't know if I will read this over the entire year, but with more of a Christian spin on things. But I just think it's it's a great thing to do to try to be a happier person. Okay, sing in the morning though. I'm going to have troubles with that because I think my singing would make me and everyone else around me not a happier person, pretty much the opposite of that, but the idea of this, I really like. Then we have Adorning the Dark by Andrew Peterson. I raved about this book so much after I read it, and I did tab it, but I didn't annotate anything, underline. Did I highlight in here even? Doesn't even look like it. Like this one page, I have 3 tabs. Yeah, so this is not a book for everyone, I don't think. It's thoughts on community, calling, and the mystery of making. And he kind of sums it up right at the beginning that he says, calling, as I understand it, is to use whatever gifts I've been given to tell the truth as beautifully as I can. And I feel like that is what he talks about in this book, how he uses his gifts to tell the truth as beautifully as he can. And since I read this book like 2-ish years ago, I think about that a lot. Like, how am I using the gifts that God has given me to spread his glory and his love and to tell the truth as beautifully as I can? So definitely want to reread that one. The next one is another one. This one has been tabbed and highlighted so many times. This is A Waking Wonder by Sally Clarkson. This is opening your child's heart to the beauty of learning. So it is primarily like a homeschool book. I think any parent could appreciate it whether or not you're homeschooling. I got this from Book Outlet years ago and it's so funny. You don't notice it with the dust jacket on, but like there's literally a chunk out of the cover. But I want to take the dust jacket off to show you approximately how many tabs I have. And then if I flip through the pages, you can kind of see some of that highlighting just coming through. So I have read this book multiple times. I don't think I've annotated anything. I don't think I've like actually written things. I think it's just a lot of highlights. This is such an inspiration to me as a homeschooler. I really admire Sally Clarkson and the children that, you know, she has produced with her husband, how they really focus on beauty and art, and they're very talented people. And if I can help raise children like that, that'd be great. Oh yeah, this book is like, it's also like, obviously it looks like someone stepped on it. Did not get the best copy, but it's okay because I have marked it up really well. Yeah, this one has 12 different chapters, and I'm always like, oh, I'll just read 1 chapter a month. And I get so into the book that I just cruise through it all right away. Yeah, but feels like it's time for a reread. I have a couple of her books that I like to reread regularly. This one for sure, and then the other one I think is Seasons for a Mother's Heart. The only trouble I have with that one, now actually it's been a couple years since I read that one too, really good, but I think it starts in like the wrong season for my brain, and I can't remember if it starts in spring. I feel like it might start in spring, and I always think of it as a homeschool book, so I want it to start in fall. I think that's how it goes, but that one is really good to read, like 1 section per season. Yeah, so there's the 12 books, possibly 13, or possibly I'll swap that one out, that I want to reread this year. Like I said, not including the L.M. Montgomery books that I'm going to be rereading, and I'm sure there will be a couple other rereads with how I'm currently feeling, but these are going to be my priority ones other than the mod books. Do you guys reread? I'm very curious to hear. I feel like lots of people are rereaders and lots of people aren't. And I have always struggled with rereading because I started out really in the mystery and suspense genre being my like areas of interest. And once you know how a book ends, like why reread it? But in the last few years, I've come to appreciate more like the beauty of how things are written and, you know, different genres. So I feel like rereading makes more sense now. But I'm curious to hear where you guys fall. Do you have like any kind of system or rhythm to your rereads? I would love to hear about it.